player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. We have the newest iteration of Gilgamesh being introduced this week to Global. Very excited to go through this unit. It's pretty standard things for the character review. It's the overview, the stat analysis, the report card, a new player snapshot, my general thoughts, the job overview, TMR review, some job-based vision card eligibility, some general optimization pieces, a couple of my favorite teams you can potentially put him in, some sample builds to look at the stats, and then some Truststone recommendations. And so, kicking things off here, brand new Ice unit added to the game, the unique main job of Scourge Ender. He does have Sword Sorcerer and Blade Soul as sub-jobs. He does equip swords as part of the Sword Red Mage category of units. He does equip armor, helm, and accessories as well, so on the heavier side of the equipment, with a move 3 jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit, and definitely a 97 faith unit. He is a magic scaling slash damage dealer, so you absolutely want that faith at 97 at all costs to make sure you're doing the maximum damage you can. Now on his main job, max range of 6 squares away. He does have 2 AoEs and 2 unit scaling abilities, so pretty balanced in that regard. And from a resistance perspective, 20% to slash and 10% to pierce, missile, and magic. It's the whopping minus 15 to strike, though. That's definitely one of the higher amounts we've seen in a little while here. Definitely something to look out for, but really not the end of the world. He's still very competitive from a survivability perspective. And then from an ailment perspective, because he is a 97 faith unit, absolutely have to be aware of these. 50% to sleep, 50% to confusion, and 10% to disable. Sleep obviously very, very nice for what we've seen in the uptick of that as of late. Confusion's not bad either, but I really would have preferred something along the lines of the Frostbite or Slow or even Silence, but Silence, there is counterplay for that, so we'll talk about that in the Esper section. But the Mastery ability, they gave him 10 crit rate, 40 reaction block, 15% debuff weakening, and the 140 upgrade gets you 15 AoE res and 20 crit damage as well. That crit rate, crit damage, very important for this unit because he is a unit that has follow-up attacks, which is a main part of that damage calculation. And so from a stat perspective, I'm going to go through these quickly because he's right in line with all the 4th anniversary units. 4288 for a base HP is exceptionally high, right in line with where the new normal is for HP in many of these units. He is the highest base magic in the game at this time. I had to make a new column here just for him, so base magic, absolutely awesome, very competitive to set the bar for the new normal. Base agility also in a really good spot here, coming in at 59, very, very fast, above where most units end up. The base dexterity, the same thing here. He's at that 75th percentile, definitely way above where most units get for base dexterity. And the same thing can be said for luck here, coming in at 191 base luck. So very strong base stats. When you consider the total stats here with the board nodes, the mastery ability, things of that nature, he absolutely ends up with really no general weaknesses, in my opinion. They did some really good things on the board here to give him a lot of extra dexterity, luck, and even HP percent on the board node as well. And so we look at the agility here. He's also, again, very fast, all things considered. He is normally around that 83 mark when you have the vision cards equipped. He can get up to 90, though, which is really where most units end up nowadays. You really don't get much faster than that, so innately one of the fastest characters in the game with that passive equipped as well. From the crit hit perspective, he is very strong in the crit rate gradient because he does have that extra 10% on the mastery. He's also got some crit rate nodes on his board, and he technically has a passive you can equip for another 12%, which you likely will have on a majority of the time, which is what this second circle is. That's an extra 12% added in here that, yeah, he's way above where most units innately end up for crit hit rate. And the crit avoidance rate's basically in line with most. This was only a couple percentage points where the new normal is. So, in a good starting spot overall. Now for the accuracy, this is really the first spot where you see the cracks in the stats for him. He's not a crazy innately accurate, and they did not give him any passive abilities to bump it up either. So while some of these newer units do have passives, they have board nodes that have accuracy on them. They have other things that can kind of compensate with the extra 30% hit chance on some of their abilities. He does not have any of that. He does have 2 guaranteed hits, though. One on the main job, one is the limit break. But this is definitely something you're going to want to work into your builds, where we're seeing a little bit of not hyper evasion, but it's high enough that he will miss if you don't consider it. So you absolutely need to think about that. Now evasion, he's kind of on that gradient, but I do not consider him an evade unit. Ice as an element doesn't have a ton of support for it. Sword Red Mage doesn't necessarily either. So maybe when you're min-maxing the stats, but practically speaking, I don't really think it's there. And we get to the report card. The effective HP starting things off here is an A for me. 0 defense, 4 spirit, but he's got both 15 AoE and unit res and 15% physical damage reduction when his HP is above a certain threshold, in conjunction with many of those double-digit positive weapon type resistances, as well as the high HP stat. Absolutely an A here with many of the other modern units. Their survivability is also an A plus here. Now, it's not, he's not a bulky, brawly bruiser unit, but there's so many aspects to his survivability. There's really no like one definitive weakness. You have a 7,500 HP physical barrier, 25 AoE res, 25 AoE wide res. The follow-up attack of his absorbs the damage that it does. He's courage capable with a very strong courage seal, 25% physical damage reduction on buff, and he does have a counter ability that also can heal himself. He's got an HP barrier on the sub job should you ever want to go that route in the future, and a heal ability on a different sub job, which he won't use in the middle of a battle, but on a second Guild War fight, he will opt to use it, or if the hit rate really isn't there and he's at 0%, he'll likely use it too. So there's a lot of things there to like from the survivability perspective. The damage is also an A plus for me. Great penetrations overall, physical damage up with the limit break. The follow-up attack is a significant amount of damage output. Good crit rate, good base stats. He's got a magic barrier break. There's a lot to like here, and this is one of his main reasons for why he's so good is the raw damage output, so absolutely love that. The agility is also an A, as we saw. With that passive, he's at 91 versus 81 as the average. The accuracy, I'm going with a C plus here. Again, that guaranteed hit is accessible in the main job, but not on his strongest ability. It's absolutely something to build into him. And from the evasion perspective, going with a B minus, technically on the gradient, but Ice doesn't really have a ton of support for it, so I would not really consider him an evade unit in the modern state of the game. Now, movement, I am going with an A. He's got a jump +1 passive you could equip, and a move jump 1 buff on the sub job, which you're likely not going to be using all that often, but it's there. I'll reflect it in the grade because of that. And the auto ease of use for me is actually a B. Now, the only reasons why is he's very straightforward, but that range of 6 can be baited, and he's absolutely 10 billion and a half % a 2 buff unit. You must get both those buffs off, and there's a little more you need to know in terms of like the crit rate potential to maximize the follow-up damage. You got to build the accuracy in there somewhere, so it's not as simple as just like throw him in a team and he's amazing. There is some stuff you got to think about, but that does not stop him from being an A for the game disruption. He's very self-sufficient, absolutely slots in well in the current meta. Very strong unit, very competitive with the top end, and will be for the foreseeable future. The passive abilities of his, I'm going with an A. Great variety of passives. Very happy with what they all do. The counter ability is a B+. It's not OP, it's not amazing, but it is a good one. Fits with what he wants to do. The overall dropping kit for me, though, is a B+. He's a straight cannon of a unit, but not an overwhelming amount of like team utility. He's very effective at what he wants to do, though. It's just that the job is a little bit straightforward, which is not the end of the world, but I could see a unit eventually coming in that maybe phases him out to a degree. But at the end of the day, this is an A+ unit. Absolutely. A disruptor, a meta unit. There is counterplay to him. He's not completely broken, and he's very competitive into a variety of teams. There's a lot to really like, and so I'm not going to hand out that S grade as freely because this is kind of like the new normal of sorts, but he's as close as you can get at the moment. I'm very happy with that. So the general thoughts: great penetrations overall, 40 from the passive, 20 from a weapon. Sword Red Mage has 2 penetration vision cards as well. The sub jobs do have some buffs and abilities that can add /res pen, but I don't see that being very common or really viable, so it's there. Don't really expect it, though. The spear penetration, he's got 40 on a second passive you can equip, and 40 on his 120 ability, so he can get up to that 80 or 90 pretty reliably with the Truststone as well. The AP management, though, there is a slight issue there potentially. There's nothing really innately for AP management. He does have a passive you can equip that reduces AP consumption, but you might not always have that on. The skills are overall kind of expensive, and he only starts off with 50% of his AP pool, and so when you're in a game right now where there's going to be Frostbite everywhere and AP down and Veritas of the Wind TMRs, this is definitely something to consider. The Frostbite on his limit break is absolutely game-changing, though. Very high for a 97 faith unit at that 67% proc rate. He's also got an incredibly reliable courage seal, where not only can he seal courage on hit for himself, but his follow-up attack will also seal courage. So if you have a teammate that walks over and hits someone at range, it will also seal the courage on that ability. He has CT up on 2 abilities when you finish an enemy, so that's very good for that turn order to kind of like get that quick CT restore when you are able to secure an elimination. He also has a nice value add that he can't have his own CT down at all, which is very, very strong. We've seen how debilitating getting your CT broken can be in this game. Him and not being able to, very, very strong. Wonderful sub-job versatility too. All 3 of them have very strong pros and cons. I have a favorite, but all 3 of them very viable. He's an enormous sword red mage addition to the game, perfect for what that cast needed. He absolutely elevates ice in a big way too. Even if the other units are faded a little bit, he's a really good carry unit that still will synergize very well with what ice currently has. He does have a magic barrier break, though it is likely a little more niche in its overall application throughout the battle. He does have a great debuff weakening angle too, where he's got that 15 innately. The future Lucille vision card gives another 25, and the Shinryu vision card also has some that you could put into the sub slot. So the debuff weakening is absolutely a strong point for him. They've also smartly given him 10 crit rate and 20 crit damage on those upgrades, which is a big differentiator for his follow-up damage. Absolutely something to look at. The 40 reaction block innately also great for reasons we've talked about at length. I would look out for those accuracy issues though. Definitely have to either Truststone or Esper or Vision Card, something to put it into his equipment build. Now for the new player thoughts, the pull verdict for me is actually a skip. I would not recommend newer accounts to pull on him, and it's not a reflection of his value. You know, the ice permanent pull units aren't awful, but they won't carry you for long. I don't think ice is the strongest element to start off with. It's not bad. The vision cards are stellar, though. Definitely some of the best vision cards in the game. But when you consider the sword red mage angle, there's really only 2 permanent pull units, Howlet and Reagan, that I think are worth anything, and even then, they're not worth much. Summer Glaciella is still the key to the Sword Red Mage team. The vision cards are darn good, though. There's some good stuff you can build off here. And so while Ice isn't generally a bad element, a lot of their best units are units that have been limited as of late. And Sword Red Mage, although it's a good class, does require a lot of good vision card stuff. So it's the kind of thing that's, for a new player, you know, I'd probably hold on pulling Gilgamesh. I'd wait for maybe Summer Glaciella with a upcoming summer unit rerun, which is going to be imminent here within the next month or two. That, you know, sure, maybe if you grab her, you can get Gilgamesh down the line, then you can really build something out. But right now, I think he's a tough unit to really build around if you don't have the proper support for him. And he's permanent pull, so you can wait and get him anytime you want. Now for the passive abilities, going through the job here, that Dream of Living Together top passive here is definitely the best one. That 40 slash res pen, the 15 unit res, the 24% magic. After that, Magic Sword Mastery is my favorite for that agility and the Spirit Pen and the crit rate. I find it hard to run this unit without having both of these on. Could you do it? Yes. That's a pretty big step down, though, from some damage output. The only other one I would consider is the one that has the decreased AP consumption. The Jump Plus one is nice, but obviously a little more niche depending on the map. So you have some good ones to pick from, but I think the top and bottom ones are definitely the best. The counter abilities here, this is a preemptive ability, 30% proc rate, range of 3 squares away. It will absorb half the damage that it does. It's not a ton of self-heal for himself, but every little bit counts. But the fact that it's a preemptive attack certainly is very, very nice. We look at the main job buffs here. His primary buff, the teammate one, is that HP barrier, the AoE res, and the AoE wide res. The second buff is crucially important, which is why I emphasized it earlier. This is where he gives himself courage. It's a 25% physical reduction. It also seals courage and will have the follow-up ability that will absorb damage if someone is standing within 3 squares of you. This is exceptionally important to get the second buff online. A TMR isn't even worth considering if it means you risk not getting this off. Absolutely need it. And for the main job offensive abilities, all 4 of these scale off 120% of his magic stat. There are 4 ice-oriented slash-type damage abilities. You know, 2 unit scaling, 2 AoEs, got a diamond and a cross shape. You like to see that. This diamond shape is really the big one, though. This is the double hit, the 60% AoE crush, Dispel Shell, Dispel, magic reduction buffs as well. It also will have that CT to himself if he can kill an enemy with it. Absolutely amazing ability. Really not much more to say. It's just one of those things that he's gonna just do damage and have that follow-up attack work in his favor. Now for the limit break, this is another great limit break, but it is rather expensive at 58 AP. It's the magic damage up, the guaranteed hit, the chance to frostbite, on this kind of like giant cross shape, the calculated Ren shape, as we call it at this point. It's a very good limit break, quite frankly. So great opener, great way to turn the tide of battle in your favor. The sub jobs here, the Scourge Ender, this is the one that gives the healing to an ally and the haste to himself. I actually really like this ability for manual play and for second Guild War fights. The Quiet Wings is like on paper a good buff. I don't see him using it all that often, but I think this is a very competitive sub job to consider. The Sword Sorcerer is not bad. This might be my second favorite, just because I like the slash res pen here on hit, on another double hit ability. I don't love a ton of what else is in this kit. The disable's kind of niche. But Sorcery Rush isn't bad either, because it's technically cheaper than this second ability here, and it's a higher mod at 200% versus the 165, in addition to it being a double hit. So I like Sorcery Rush too, but I think Blade Soul also is competitive because of the HP magic barrier here at the bottom. Now, I don't think it's likely you'll ever get a third buff on him, so it's kind of irrelevant that he has this buff here. It's nice, but practically speaking, not going to really help you a lot. The offensive abilities here are okay. I think they're inferior to the Sword Sorcerer, though. So I think this is likely the best sub job, but I think the Scourge Ender sub job here, too, is definitely worth considering and tweaking. Now, for the TMR review, this is a great TMR that it gives whoever's equipping it a honeycomb barrier. And just to recap what that means, you can read this as between a range distance of 4 squares to 7 squares away, you will get 10% damage reduction, which means if you're 4 squares away from the enemy and they attack you, you will reduce that damage by 10%. If you are 5 squares away, it'll reduce the damage by 20%. If you're 6 squares away, 30%, 7 squares away, 40%. So this is a great survivability tool because it can't be dispelled at this time in the game. It's just a great survivability one with the addition of having the healing power down upon hit, and this does stack with abilities that already have healing power down on it. So you could get up to 80 healing power down on this TMR usage. So I absolutely love what this has to offer. I don't think it's worth pulling them just for it, but if you get this, 2 thumbs up for sure. Now, for the job-based vision card eligibility, Sword Red Mage does have some of the best overlaps in the game, most strongly with the Spear, the Greatsword, and the Katana, but there's absolutely some bones there between Gun, Fist, Sword Warrior, and Sword Knight, particularly when the Chariot vision card comes out a week from now, and even the Lucille vision card 2 weeks from now. So it's not perfect. There's no one class that aligns absolutely up and down exactly what you need, but Sword Red Mage units are very self-sufficient, so you don't need a ton of vision card support to really make them work optimally. Now, for the unique equipment, his sword is absolutely awesome. It's 15 human killer permanently, slash res pen, slash attack, and the physical damage down. I actually like the crit rate build of this personally because, again, this is a unit you really want to jack up that crit rate as high as possible to ensure that his follow-up damage is doing what it should. We'll look at some calcs at the very end here. The general optimization, I don't think there's a better sword than that Ice Blade, the Extreme, or whatever they want to call it, but Blood Sword is definitely competitive, having the AP on there, as well as some of the extra heal back. Flowering isn't a bad one either. It's kind of similar to Ice Blade with just some slight variations. Sleep Blade for memes, being an AP unit that might run out, or if he gets silenced by Ashen King Mont, and this dude is suddenly basic attacking, have some fun putting some people to sleep, but that's not a real recommendation. But the other equips, I think the Maximilian armor is definitely the way to go because he will constantly be replenishing his health to above that 70% threshold, hopefully. The Alexandrite ring, also a great one for the accuracy. The rest of them are obviously great options too. And the Espers, loads of versatility here. I am partial to Chariot, which is the new one coming out. That obviously is ice attack. It's 20 area res pen as well for him, but there are a lot of other good espers here. Dark Ramu, Dark Odin, all have the human killer, which you absolutely want to focus on so he gets the extra damage in his follow-up attack. But Shiva is a great option, regular OG Shiva, because of the accuracy nodes, the ice attack, but even Dark Shiva I like too because of the AP that she gives too. So there's a lot of different options here. Even Glacial I have here because it's got the luck percent nodes that does count as a form of accuracy, and it's got the slash attack and a couple other good things. So I like a bunch of different espers. I don't have a clear favorite yet, but it's probably going to come down to Chariot, Dark Shiva, and likely even Odin. Now for the TMRs, I wouldn't even consider it. Put the fastest TMR you can on him and turn it off. and just let it be an agility stat stick for you. I don't see him doing more than the 2 buffs that he already has, if not using one of the third buffs that he has in his kit too, which I think there's a couple competitive third buffs, as we saw. Now, for some of my favorite teams, I think this one of the top left is by far one of the strongest. It's Gilgamesh, Sephiroth, and Summer Glaciella. Great overlap there where water and ice has some good synergy between Glaciella and Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh and Sephiroth do a lot of good things together in terms of covering each other's weaknesses and really kind of dispelling any kind of damage mitigation you could possibly try to use against them, which is why the second team here is also very good. It's Gilgamesh and Sephiroth and the future Lucille unit. This is not Shal's. This is her sister. Lucille does excellent job of like pocketing both of them and just allowing them to just kill everything in sight. So very good second option there. I do like the iteration with Kadaj where that's more of an offensive team in nature, taking out Summer Glaciella, putting in Kadaj instead. But you do get a ton of those slash chains. You have the Katana synergy. There's a lot there that they still do to help each other out. But I also do like the Mono Ice team here. Gilgamesh can seal Courage for Aldoa. A2 can barrier seal the barriers for both Aldoa and Gilgamesh. That's the kind of team that will get absolutely shut down by one enemy Sephiroth, so it's very risky to run right now, but that's still a high quality team on paper. I do think there are some other options here. There is an iteration where I think the Howlet unit isn't awful. He and Gilgamesh do some half decent things for each other in terms of like absorbing damage and just having those slash chains, some of the imperils, but it's not nearly as strong as some of these other iterations. And even a team with Joom certainly still works too. Joom is so good on her own. She also does a lot of good things well, with Gilgamesh and Summer Glaciella really being the foundation of that to let them live and make sure they can regen their health appropriately. So these are just a couple. There's obviously a bunch more you could likely put together. I even think there's teams with Ash and King Mont you could likely run with that ice and earth overlap, but I wanted to stop here. And the sample builds, I have 2 here. One is Mono Ice, one is the Sword Katana. This Mono Ice team, there's a lot of things to unpack because there are some things artificially bolstering these stats. One of them is the fact that I have HP percent. Technically, both of these subslots between Dark Odin and the Freesis, so his HP is much higher because of those vision cards. Same can be said for having 3 ice units, where he gets all that HP percent. I am using the new Chariot Esper here for him as well, and so you're looking at, over 13,000 HP, about 1,800 magic, 39 unit res, 45 AoE res. Modifier-wise, he's sitting at about 61 crit damage here. Very important for that follow-up. But 97 ice attack. He's got some decent effective HP overall. 30% debuff weakening. There's a lot to still like about this build. I am going with a defense set and an agility set for Truststones here. You'll see me recommend those on the next 2 slides. But I am using the crit build of the weapon here too. I think this is a solid team. And I actually like having the Odin vision card here in the main slot, because he's got that accuracy issue, and regular OG Odin gives 20% accuracy or 25% accuracy to ice units. So definitely helps him out in that regard. Now the second team here, maybe a slight step back from the stat perspective, but synergy-wise, I think this is way stronger than that Mono Ice team. A little bit lower on that HP for the reasons I listed. The magic also a smidge lower here, but he does, at least in this build, have a little more on the side of like crit damage, some higher slash res pen innately. The debuff weakening is up to 55% here. Still pretty competitive with the unit and the AoE res. He's got a higher innate crit rate on this team too, and ironically, you're still actually using the good old-fashioned Odin vision card here. And so this is a unit scaling vision card, which this overlap of units does not have in common on the job-based VCs, but I think that's fine. I still think the 20% accuracy to Gilgamesh is still very valuable in addition to the 20 unit res to the party. So definitely love this team and what it can do. Just a quick shout out here, using the calculations and metrics of this build, I wanted to just like highlight some of the potential damage numbers of what his follow-up damage should do. And the way you can really read this is I'm looking at a couple different scenarios. One where he's at 50 spear penetration, and that's this top box here. One where he's at 90 spear penetration, that's his bottom box here. And then I'm looking at if it was a unit with 20 unit res or 40 unit res. And then within those, if they had 20 spear to 40 spear, just to kind of see the gradient of where most of these damage values end up. And so you could get as high as upwards of this 5,000 mark. And again, this is not including any reincarnation stats either, which would bring this up rather substantially. But the bottom line is the difference between regular hits and critical hits is not double, but like you could round down and say it's like close to double. It's a fair amount more damage getting that critical hit in. So I wanted just to emphasize that numerically here that, yeah, you're talking about a difference of 2,000 damage on average on each follow-up attack. Many of these follow-up attacks on critical hit would likely kill a unit who was re-raised, often the difference between finishing an enemy off or not. So I just wanted to give that quick snapshot. Obviously, feel free to pause and digest the numbers, but I just wanted to at least put something out there for you. And the last thing here, the trust stones, left side, I do like the defense or spirit personally. I like having that extra healing power. I would go for some of the extra status resistances for him. I personally really like curse and silence versus Ashen King Mott, which reminds me, I wanted to go back here. The Chariot Esper gives 25 silence resistance to the unit. So if you have the Chariot Esper on and the 25% silence res, that'll put him up to 50%. It's going to be very difficult for Ashen King Mott to silence him at that level, so I do like the conjunction of both of those. The right side here, I would just go agility or aim. I think these 6 are pretty solid in terms of recommendations for Truststone passives, but I could see a situation where you would sub out the crit rate and crit damage for the ice attack and the acquired AP 20. Honestly, I don't think it's a massive difference between the two of them. There's pros and cons to both. The ice attack 10 obviously will allow all of his abilities to do more damage on average, assuming he's not crit hitting them. Then again, if you're assuming he is crit hitting them, you want the crit damage in there. It's roughly equivalent modifier wise, but I think these top 4 are at least very safe to put into him. I like that for him. And that's the Gilgamesh review altogether. There's a lot here to really like about what they did with the character. He's going to be very fun to use. I know a lot of people that have invested heavily into ice and water as of late will definitely find value in him. Overall, 2 thumbs up. I don't know how long he'll last in the game. Obviously, DPS units can kind of come and go, but he's definitely a meta unit that I would hope would have some lasting power for a while. But that's all my thoughts are now. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll talk to you later.